My name is Lydia Hale, and until that night, I thought I had learned to control my anger. Turns out, there are some moments no woman ever forgets, especially when history repeats itself in front of her child. The clinking of glasses and low chatter filled my brother's backyard. The air smelled of grilled steak, cheap perfume, and hypocrisy. My daughter, Sophie, had just turned 16. She stood beside me, nervously holding a tray of cupcakes she'd baked herself, her eyes bright, her hands trembling just a little. Then it happened. "Are you serious right now?" my brother, Mark, barked, his voice slicing through the laughter. Before anyone could blink, his hand came down, hard, across Sophie's face. The sound of it cracked like thunder. The whole patio froze. I swear I heard the wind stop. She should have known better. Mark spat. Like father, like daughter. Both are useless. My blood turned to ice. That sentence. That exact sentence. The same words my father had once thrown at me, years ago, before I walked away from this family for good. I felt my heart pounding against my ribs, a dull roar in my ears. Sophie's eyes welled up, her lip trembling. She looked at me, waiting, terrified, broken. And that's when I knew. This wasn't about cupcakes. It was about every insult I'd swallowed, every slap I'd buried, every time I'd chosen silence for the sake of keeping peace. Not tonight. Not anymore. I set my glass down. My fingers were shaking, but my voice, calm, deliberate, cut through the air like steel. "Mark," I said, "you just made the biggest mistake of your life." The words echoed in my head like they had never left. Like father, like daughter, both are useless. I'd heard them once before, from the only man whose approval I used to crave more than air. I was 19 then, standing in our narrow kitchen in Cedar Falls, the smell of burnt coffee hanging between us. My father, Richard Hale, sat at the table, polishing his boots like he always did when he was angry. My brother, Mark, leaned against the counter, pretending to read a newspaper he couldn't even finish. "I got accepted," I said, holding out the letter with trembling hands. "A full scholarship to the state university. Graphic design. It's everything I wanted, Dad." For a moment, I thought I saw pride flicker in his eyes. But then, his jaw tightened. He looked up at me, cold, dismissive. "You're not going anywhere," he said flatly. "College isn't for girls who'll just end up changing diapers." Mark snorted. "Maybe she can draw something useful for once. Like a paycheck." They both laughed. I didn't. I couldn't. "I can pay my own way," I whispered. "I'll work nights if I have to." That was when it happened. The chair screeched back. His hand struck before I even finished speaking. "Don't you ever talk back to me like that," my father roared. "You think you're better than this family? Like father, like daughter. Both useless dreamers. Your mom had her head in the clouds too. Look where it got her." He stormed out, leaving me clutching my cheek, hot tears spilling onto the acceptance letter. Mark didn't say a word. He just stared, a smirk playing at his lips, before walking past me like I didn't exist. That night, I sat on my bed, staring at the small wooden jewelry box my mother had left me before she died. Inside it was a simple silver pendant, a little feather charm, and a folded note in her handwriting. "Fly, even if they break your wings. You'll learn to soar higher that way." I remember packing a single suitcase and slipping out before dawn. No goodbyes. No apologies. Just the sound of gravel crunching under my shoes as I stepped into the dark. I didn't know where I was going, but I swore I'd never let anyone make my daughter feel the way they made me feel that night. The first few years after I left home were a blur of cheap apartments, lukewarm instant noodles, and sleepless nights that smelled like coffee and printer ink. I worked anywhere that would take me, diners, copy shops, even cleaning offices after hours. During the day, I took online classes, sketching designs on napkins and cheap sketch pads whenever inspiration struck. There were nights I cried until my eyes burned, from exhaustion, from loneliness, from that familiar whisper of self-doubt. Maybe they were right about you. But every time that voice spoke, I reached for the little silver feather around my neck, the one my mother left me. Fly, even if they break your wings.
So I did.
By 23, I'd managed to land an internship at a small advertising firm in Chicago. The pay was miserable, but the creative director, Helen Morales, was a force of nature, confident, direct, and brutally honest. One evening, after reviewing my sketches, she looked at me and said, "You've got something raw, Lydia. Pain but purpose. That's rare. Don't you ever dim it to make someone else comfortable." Those words became a compass. I stayed late most nights, learning software no one bothered to teach me, volunteering for projects others avoided. Slowly, my designs began to stand out. The first time a client asked for me by name, I remember walking home through the snow, laughing and crying at the same time. When I turned 26, I opened a small studio apartment downtown and started taking freelance projects. Nothing glamorous, restaurant menus, small business logos, birthday invitations, but every single one meant freedom. Then came Sophie. I wasn't married when I had her. Her father, Ethan, left before she was even born. When I told Mark and my father, all they said was, "Figures." I stopped returning their calls after that. Sophie became my reason for everything. I'd hold her tiny hand while working late nights, whispering promises over the soft rhythm of her breathing. "You'll never have to beg for respect, baby. You'll earn it. You'll own it." By the time Sophie started middle school, my design agency, Featherline Studios, was quietly thriving. We'd grown from my kitchen table to a team of 6 talented women, each one with her own story of being underestimated. I never flaunted my success. I didn't post luxury trips or big announcements. To my family, I was just doing okay. And that's how I wanted it, until that night, when Mark's hand struck my daughter's face and dragged every buried ghost back into the light. He had no idea whose house he was standing in. No idea whose company was sponsoring the event he was bragging about. No idea that the useless girl he once mocked was now the silent name behind everything he admired. But he was about to find out. The silence after Mark's outburst was thick enough to choke on. All I could hear was Sophie's uneven breathing beside me. Her cheek had turned crimson, and her hands clutched the edge of the table like she was trying to hold herself together. I took a slow step forward. "Go inside, sweetheart," I said softly.
Now.
She hesitated, her eyes flicking from me to her uncle. "Mom, it's okay." "No," I said, this time firmer. "Go." She nodded, wiping her tears, and disappeared into the house. Mark was still fuming, his chest rising and falling with the kind of arrogance that comes from thinking he's still in control. "You've spoiled that girl," he snapped. "No respect, no manners. Exactly like you used to be." I smiled, the kind of calm, quiet smile that unsettles people who are used to chaos.
"Funny," I said.
"I was just thinking how much hasn't changed since I left." He frowned, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before I could answer, the patio door opened and a man in a gray suit approached, one of my clients. "Lydia," he said warmly. "Sorry to interrupt. The sponsor wants a quick photo before we wrap up." Mark blinked. "Sponsor? What sponsor?" I turned to him, letting my words fall slowly, deliberately. "The Hale charity event," I said. "Hosted by Featherline Studios, my company." For the first time I saw it, the flicker of realization in his eyes. He laughed nervously. "You're kidding. Featherline? That design firm? You work for them?" I took a step closer, meeting his gaze.
"No, Mark.
I don't work for them. I own them." The patio fell dead silent. My father, who had been sitting near the grill, looked up sharply. His weathered hands froze mid-motion. "You," he said, disbelief curling his voice. "You're the one behind all this?" "Yes, Dad," I said. "The same girl who wasn't good enough for college. The one you both said would never make it without a man." Mark's face turned pale. "You can't be serious. This whole thing, the guests, the sponsorship, is funded by me," I finished. "Every dollar. Every design on these banners. Every client shaking your hand tonight. That's my work." I watched the color drain from his face, the way his jaw clenched as pride wrestled with humiliation. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The quiet truth was louder than any revenge speech could ever be. My father stood slowly, his voice brittle. Why didn't you ever tell us? Because you never asked, I said simply. And honestly, I was tired of proving myself to people who decided I was worthless before I even tried. I turned to the guests still lingering awkwardly nearby. Excuse us, please. Family matter. When they shuffled away, I finally looked back at Mark. You know what hurts the most? I said. You didn't just hit my daughter, Mark. You hit every part of me I had to rebuild after the last time he did. He swallowed hard. Lydia,
No.
Don't. I cut in, voice trembling but steady. You wanted to humiliate her. You wanted her to feel small. You wanted to remind me that you still had power. But here's the truth. I leaned in, just close enough for him to hear the softness in my voice. You don't get to define us anymore. He looked away, shame creeping across his face. My father didn't say a word, just stared at the ground, his silence heavier than any apology. Then I took a deep breath and said the words that sealed it all. You once told me I'd never make it without a man. Turns out, I built an empire because of men like you. The look on his face, that stunned, hollow disbelief, was something I'd waited years to see. And this time, when I turned away, I didn't feel guilt. Only peace. Mark sat down heavily, his anger deflating into silence. My father's eyes darted between us, searching for words that refused to come. I stood there, feeling my heartbeat slow, the adrenaline fading into something quieter. Not rage, not revenge, clarity. You both taught me a lot, I began softly. Not in the way you think. You taught me how not to raise a child. How not to love. Mark exhaled sharply. Lydia, it was a mistake, all right? I shouldn't have. Hit her? I interrupted. You're right. You shouldn't have. And yet, you did. Because somewhere in your head, you still believe power is proven by how small you can make someone else feel. He lowered his head, his voice small. I was angry. So was Dad, I said. And his father before him. That's the legacy, isn't it? The men lose control, and the women clean up the pieces. I turned toward my father. You called me useless once. Do you even know how many people my company employs now? How many single mothers work for me, earning enough to send their daughters to college? He didn't respond, just pressed his lips together, the shame visible in the tremor of his hands. I inhaled deeply. You both want to be in Sophie's life.
Fine.
But there will be rules. Mark looked up, hesitant. Rules? Yes. I walked closer, every word deliberate. First, you will apologize to her. In person. Not just with words, but with respect. You'll show up at her next school event and cheer for her like she deserves. He nodded slowly, guilt tightening his jaw. Second, you'll stop calling women in this family weak. That ends tonight. Your daughter, your wife, Sophie, they're not your shadows. My father's eyes flickered. And me. I met his gaze, feeling the weight of every unspoken year between us. You want to fix things? Start by saying her name, my mother's name, without bitterness. You blamed her for dreaming, for hoping. Maybe if you'd supported her instead of silencing her, you'd have seen how strong she really was. He swallowed hard. Lydia, I raised a hand gently. I'm not doing this to shame you, Dad. I'm doing it because I refuse to let Sophie inherit the same silence I did. He nodded, eyes glistening. Third, I continued, if you want to be part of my life again, you'll earn it. Not through apologies, but through actions. Respect. Consistency. And understanding that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The sound of wind chimes broke the silence, a soft, trembling melody that felt like the world exhaling. Mark finally whispered, I don't deserve her forgiveness or yours. I looked at him, calm but firm. No, you don't. But you can start earning it. Then I turned toward the house where Sophie stood quietly in the doorway, watching us. Because from now on, I said, the women in this family don't stand in the shadows. We build our own light. Her lips curved into a tiny, trembling smile, and that was all the closure I needed in that moment. 2 weeks passed. In that time, the silence between us softened into something fragile, like a glass bridge that could hold weight if no one stomped too hard. Mark came over one afternoon, holding a bouquet of sunflowers, Sophie's favorite. He stood awkwardly at the door, his eyes downcast. "I came to say I'm sorry," he said, voice shaking. "Not just for that night, but for all the years before it." Sophie hesitated, looking at me first. I gave a small nod. She stepped forward, arms folded, but her chin lifted high. "You hurt me," she said quietly. "And you hurt my mom." Mark swallowed hard. "I know. I can't undo it, but I'll try to be better. For both of you." For the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen in him since we were kids: sincerity. Maybe even shame that meant growth. Later that week, my father called. His voice was weaker, slower than I remembered. "Lydia," he said, "I was wrong. About everything. You made something out of nothing. I'm proud of you." I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, holding the phone, listening to his uneven breathing. Maybe those words came decades late, but hearing them still loosened something in my chest that I didn't realize I'd been holding. That night, after everyone had gone, I stood by the window of my office. The city lights blinked softly in the distance, glowing dots of gold scattered across the dark. Sophie was asleep on the couch, her cheek pressed against her art portfolio. I touched the small silver feather at my neck, tracing its edges like a prayer. My mother's voice echoed in memory. "Fly, even if they break your wings." She was right. I hadn't just flown. I'd learned to glide through storms, to teach my daughter that even the wind can be an ally if you face it the right way. I glanced back at Sophie, her chest rising and falling, peaceful now. And I smiled. Somewhere deep down, I knew forgiveness wasn't a finish line. It was a journey, one we were finally walking, step by step. As I turned off the lights, my voice found the strength it once lost, steady, certain, free. They called us useless once. But what they didn't know was that we were just getting started. Fade out.
The end.